So let's slowly get restarted. It has been a long day, but we're almost there. And I think, actually, quickly reading through what's on here, I think there's a relatively coherent set of issues and solutions that people identified. So we might be able to have a focused discussion and transition smoothly to the rest of the evening. Also, my group 3, relocated to Bob's early on in the discussion. So Tara did a very good job of keeping us, well, actually, she didn't keep us focused. She just kept the reporting focused, which I think was a good win. But anyway, yeah, I think let's do it like we did the last one. Maybe people just jump onto any of these points and elaborate on them or raise something that didn't come up in the discussion. I mean, something to start with on the posting side of the discussion during the breakouts is, and something that came up in our group consistently, was this question of author control over the process versus reviewer control over the process. And in the spirit of several discussions at this meeting, we want this to be less of a fight and more of a partnership, right? So, I mean, how do we encourage that? Do people have thoughts about that? Experiences to share? Negative or positive? Suggestions on how we can make this happen? Because we had, at least within our group, we had agreement that speedier posting of reviews would help the ecosystem and the process. But of course, it has to be a partnership. So I don't know if people have thoughts about that. We're going to have to, somebody's just going to have to go for it so that we break out of this half beer, half coffee stupor.
Right, so we had a different topic in our group, but coming to the point, Gautam, that you were raising about who should have control and how to facilitate this, I thought I would share some experience from a project that we've coordinated at Bio, where we've done it in 2 different ways. Essentially, we started a project to create collaborative reviews on preprints and post them publicly. And actually, last year when we were doing this, we decided to have the step of saying we want to make sure that the author knows and agrees. We don't want to get into any sensitivities, etc. And we had that process, and our experience was that what you were saying about the speedier steps in all of this, it did create some bottlenecks in terms of having to contact the authors, and also we didn't get so many responses necessarily in terms of people saying, I'm happy to have these reviews posted. When we did, in the cases that we did, the authors were very happy about the review, etc. And then we did a similar project this year, but actually decided to remove this step of asking the authors for permission. But we did tell them we are going to review your paper, so be warned. Essentially, we didn't want to ambush them later on. And interestingly, we wonder whether this would mean more people coming back and saying, how dare you, kind of thing, and don't post it. And we had 0 responses like that. And actually, some of them did respond saying, it's great that you're doing this. I look forward to the comments, so they were happy. So I think, I mean, it came up earlier also in the context of other discussions, but I wonder if there is some element of the fear of it versus the evidence of this being a problem. And I think it was you who said earlier the paper is already out there, so can you really control what everybody's going to do or react, or how are they going to respond to it? So, yeah, in case it's helpful for the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts on? Yeah, Ron. Oh, sorry.
Well, just going back to an earlier conversation, anything I think that can promote constructive dialogue between, the author, the scientist, and the reviewer, the scientist, the better. I mean, that gets back to the spirit of, trying to improve scientific work. I think rapid posting kind of breaks that dialogue. Mm-hmm. And, it kind of stops it short. And so I'm not sure that's achieving the goal we want to achieve. And I think what we're also trying to do is recruit more people into the system, more people to buy into the system. And, things that limit that are not going to be constructive for, promoting this entire space and ecosystem. So I think at least the author response, to the reviews is at least a chance to have that dialogue. And I think if you just stop that short, you're going to diminish participation and also diminish the product, which is in the end improving the work.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, just before, Daniela, before your comment or question, I think what we concluded in the group was that regardless of the timing, it had to be an equal opportunity to author and reviewer to participate or to have a voice in that. So if you were to post the review speedily, it would also require allowing the authors to post a comment about what they have in progress, or what their plan is for revision, or which parts of the review they want to address. So it has to, for sure, I agree. It can't be one-sided, because people will simply not participate in that system. So I see a couple of thoughts. Daniela, do you want to go first, and then?
Sure. I just want to add to the, for us, still anecdotal kind of a thing that Iraj just said, which is in our experience running what we call live stream preprint journal clubs, so collaborative reviews in which we invite researchers to come and review preprints. Oftentimes we have authors there, and we have never had negative, constructive, not negative feedback. We had plenty of negative feedback, but like negative responses from the authors. If anything, it's always been gratitude. In my case, when I was still a PhD student, even offered, extended to offered for PhD, for a postdoc position, really a lot of enthusiasm from the perspective of the author. So I just wanted to emphasize that I'd love to quantify more of that, and we're working on it. But I also agree that there is, as long as the conversations get constructive, there's always been positive reactions. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniela. Richard, before we come back to you, some people have the throw mic thingies.
Yeah, so we try to quantify this a little bit about the timing of posting the reviews. And before we sort of mandated the posting of the reviews, we were a little bit worried. And so we did a survey, and on 1,000 people who replied, it was pretty clear that the limiting step for accepting to post the reviews was to have the opportunity to write a detailed reply.
To respond.
Yeah. So that comes really clearly from the results. Then, there is a minority who never wants really to post the reviews until the paper is published. But very clearly, the limiting step is to have the time to reply to the review. So I think there is some data that sort of supports the fact that authors feel more comfortable. It's sort of less of a barrier if you can at least respond in a detailed way.
Cool. So Marcel.
No, you're fine. Actually, keep going. Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, could you pass yours back there? Okay, cool. And then Richard, we're to you next, and Jamie, the mic.
Super interesting conversation about reviewer-driven or author-driven requests. It just strikes me that there seems to be, on the one hand, this call for reviews should be more conversational and iterative as a desired feature of the system. And yet everything we're discussing here seems to be designed to have reviews as a static, permanent, final binary decisions about the value of a preprint. And I'm struggling to reconcile this in my head, because yes, I would like to have the ability of crediting reviewers for doing good, substantial work. There's not just a comment. On the other hand, all of the fears that I'm hearing about seems to be precisely about the notion of a review being that static, deep, monolithic assessment of the preprint as a whole. So I just want to share that. I don't have a good solution, but what I'm reading from the room is it's almost like this tension is really hard to reconcile. And it strikes me that on more conversational platforms, again, like social media, like whether an author is soliciting or not feedback once like a review is posted, that point is moot. The conversation happens. Authors may have control on removing some comments that are really negative, but it seems to be less of an issue. So no solution, just an observation to attention seems unresolved here.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting because I think that presumably the tension comes from the fact that the conversation is ideally, in an ideal world, part of the scientific process, and the static time point thing is an evaluation issue. Because as a reader or as funder or as hiring committee person, you want to glance at the product and be like, okay, that's done. And with this conversational trajectory, where you pinpoint that is super hard, right? So this is what we were discussing. So I agree, and I think that's clear from already the discussion, right? So for sure, good point. Richard?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, actually, the point I wanted to make gets to the issue that both Ron and Dario raised, which is that there's this distinction. But we've talked about this distinction between feedback and review, and this came up in the session that I was in. And one of the points that I made was that actually feedback is for the benefit of the author and review is for the benefit of the reader. And if we want to incentivize early posting, having some window before which formal assessment starts, in which the author can get feedback that is helping them before the kinds of kind of judgment that Dario is describing occur, might be an advantage and would main the incentive to post early, for fear of this term that I've used continually, for fear of the metadata of failure arriving early on the article and basically coloring it, sort of in perpetuity. So I think that would be a strategy, and I do think we need to bear in mind that there is some data about this kind of fear. As I understand, when Archive have run their survey, they persistently get a significant minority of survey respondents saying they don't want comments on Archive. And so there's, you won't know, it would be very difficult to know if people aren't posting preprints at all because they fear some of this. And I wonder if the timing of formal review might be able to address that.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Maybe people think about whether they want to add to that, but Jamie has the orange catch box.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of this gets back to what is the audience, right? And it's not just a conversation between author and reviewer. It is also a public good. Mm-hmm. It is for the eventual readers. And it is so that they can listen into that conversation between author and reviewer and then participate in that conversation themselves as an additional reviewer. So I was just texting with Prachi, about the 3 C's: collegial, contextual, and conversational, right? That good review is collegial. A good review provides context, and good review is conversational. It's not just between the author and reviewer, but invites many people into the conversation as well. And so by putting up all these barriers around who can post and when, and whether there's a period where we have to cool off before we can have the next aspect of the conversation, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot of evolving a collegial research culture where feedback is not only accepted, but something we celebrate. 4th C. I just came up with a 4th C, Prachi. Celebratory. And so I think we can do it.
Okay. That's Jamie's second beer speaking. But I mean, I think it's very consistent with this idea that as long as it is a proper conversation, there is a possibility for this space to emerge. At the moment, it's not. It's like the worst.
We've positioned peer review as this adversarial process.
Yes.
And that's what is so exciting about this meeting, that we can break that.
Yes. I mean, the worst version of this is the thing that happens less and less, which is the back and forth letters to the editor that take about 4 years to like play out, right? And anyway, Mike,
can I push back? I don't know. Can we be a bit adversarial?
Okay, so Mike, I'm sorry, Thomas wants to fight back.
Yeah, I'd like to push slightly back on the supreme value of speed for collegiality. I'm not sure I buy that. I mean, we have a platform that allows super speedy conversation, and it's called Twitter, and it just got bought by somebody. And I'm not sure that this is always conducive to a very constructive collegiality. And having a little bit of a timeout and time for reflection and having a process that is sort of civilized has its value to actually stimulate collegiality. So I'm not sure that absolute speed and immediacy is actually the best tool obligatory for collegiality and being productive.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important point. That has not really been raised, is that there might be advantages to not rushing into it. Thanks, Thomas. Mike?
Yeah, I just want to make kind of a meta point here, which is I think in a lot of these conversations, we're being afraid of our own shadows here. I think we're always talking about how to get all the people who are skeptical and all the people who might be afraid of doing something and something to participate before we've really got something for people to participate in. And I really think we should be thinking more about the people who actually want to do things this way, who are completely enthusiastic about posting preprints, who want their work to be assessed publicly and openly, and want to engage in kind of back and forth conversations with people who posted, who want a diversity of opinions on their work, the people who are out there, we know they're out there, we're seeing it already at eLife, who embrace this idea of publishing. And I think if we design a system that's all about how to pull in the conservative people at the outset, what we're going to get is a system that doesn't appeal to the people who are enthusiastic about it in the beginning. And that's one point. I mean, I can see some role for very brief little periods of time so you can cool off, but not even that. But I don't even think that those are necessary. I think we're overestimating the kind of desire people have to like look at something first before they prepare a review. But I think we're not embracing what we're trying to do enough, and not embracing the people who really are with us in trying to do this. And the second point I want to make is I really am skeptical about the value of asking people their opinions on something that doesn't exist. And I think we've seen this time and time again in publishing. And if you go to people with an existing system that their brains are accustomed to, and they that's the world they know, and you offer up something that is different and challenges their assumptions and challenges the way that things are going to work, they're almost instinctively negatively opposed to it, and they don't really know what is going to work and what isn't going to work and what they want and don't want. It's not that we shouldn't know what those opinions are, but trying to be guided by opinions of people about things that are new and different is a fool's errand that I think always leads you to being massively over conservative. So,
do we have thoughts about Mike's meta point? Yes. Yes.
So I stood up to say something quite similar to what Mike just said, okay. Steph Bertozzi, and we, unlike several of you, don't expect authors to ask us to review. We go out and find interesting manuscripts and then review them. And we tell the authors we're going to do that at the beginning. And I can, after hundreds of these, there have probably been 5 people who've written back and say, no, you do not have permission to review my manuscript. And I very politely respond, I wasn't asking your permission. Because it's in the public domain and I can review it if I want to. But I've had 0 people after posting reviews write back to me and say, you've damaged me, right? I had one guy who was really pissed off that I went ahead and reviewed his manuscript because I was going to, potentially create problems for him that he would have to address before submitting to the journal. And he thought that was unfair to his postdocs or something. But that's one person, right? So I think we need to be careful about over-exaggerating the pushback that we'll get because none of the people have asked me to review, and yet the overwhelming majority of them. The problem I have is kind of create this dialogue, right? So we post the reviews and not nearly enough people actually engage. And I think that we need to make it easier for them to do that. And I think probably it has to happen on the preprint servers. We don't want to pull that conversation. I mean, some people may want to, but I don't think that we want to pull that conversation into our private domains. I think we want to have it right where the preprint is, and make that easier for people to engage with. And I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but I think we are underperforming on the engagement, and I think we're over-worrying about the potential blowback.
Okay, so we have some consensus there on this team, but I guess Richard might want to respond to that, or he had his hand up before already. Prachi next. Also, just to say, this has been great. We should spend 5 more minutes on this, and then we will transition to other topics, but Prachi, go for it.
Richard was first, so if he wants to go,
Richard was first. I'm sorry I missed that. Richard, you were first.
No, go ahead, Prachi. I already talked, so I can wait for you.
Okay.
So polite. Everyone has been
okay,
very
so I'm going to be
collegial.
very annoying. So I completely agree with Mike and Stefano, but I'll give, rather than sort of just an opinion, I'll give you some piece of data before and after to sort of illustrate this point, which is ASAP Bio's crowd review. I mentioned this in our breakout session as well. We did a couple of iterations of this crowd review. In the first version, we did a version that required author consent to post in the trip reviews, and then which taught us a lot of important things, including the fact that it was easy to get people to review. A lot of people wanted to do it, and they actually showed up to do it. But the problem was getting authors to agree ahead of the fact that they would submit their paper to this sort of review. And then when we did the second iteration of crowd review, we changed that and said, just like Stefano said, we don't want to ask people about their opinions about reviewing a public product on a platform that allows commenting. And so we then started not using trip reviews and putting the comments in discuss so that it wouldn't require author consent. So we did a lot of reviews and then got data from the authors on what they thought after the fact of us commenting on things they didn't get to ask us, that we didn't ask for their consent ahead of time. And the data are actually overwhelmingly positive. Like all of them are from neutral to positive to very positive. Those are the data from people when we didn't ask them ahead of time. So when we asked them ahead of time, it was really hard to get anyone to agree. When we didn't ask them ahead of time, their experience was quite positive. So I would really generally advocate for this idea where we just do more of this, get it part of our, sort of science culture and diet to have this be more normalized and make it less scary for everybody, and let those who want to participate. So that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Prachi. I'm also in this ask forgiveness later category. It gets me in trouble sometimes. Though. Before we go to Richard, Marcel, you have the green catch box.
Yeah. So, just on this kind of do more point, because I think, and Stefano was sort of talking about engagement. Yeah. I for one would love to see some us collect some data and sort of gather some evidence on kind of the users of these reviews sort of out in the wild, other than journals. And that was sort of a discussion that we had in our group. Should we focus this question of reuse on sort of editors and journals? And for me, this may not be happening en masse, and that's okay. But I think even that small n of understanding the folks who are, researchers in the field who are using preprint reviews to inform what they read, what they follow up on, what they try to replicate or don't. I haven't come across good evidence around sort of what those patterns of reuse look like, and I would love to generate some if we don't have it yet.
It's a super cool point, and that's a really interesting point. And it's not just other scientists; it also extends to the media, for example. Yes. Huge discussion around preprints in the media, but we're several steps behind with that, right? So, Richard.
Yeah, I just wanted to really to sort of for Jamie more than anyone else, but I wanted to add another C, which was controversy. And the reason I said
already a technique.
Yeah. But what I'm slightly worried about is I think the aspiration to collegiality is admirable, and that's what we want. But I think we need to bear in mind that when people people never perceive highly negative reviews as collegial by kind of definition. And so, and how do we, that I'm thinking, so there's an example I think a number of people will be familiar with, and I'm inferring the journal here, but Rudy Yanish posted a paper on bioarchives claiming that SARS-CoV-2 was integrating into cells. It was, as I understand, pretty much fairly crucified on bioarchive, and then appeared in PNAS, for the most part unchanged. The response from Rudy was, well, we only put it on bioarchive in the first place because the journal that we submitted to first insisted, which I inferred was eLife. So, I think that's kind of a cautionary tale. And then he was interviewed about it, and he said, well, we only did it because we were told to. We won't do it again. We wouldn't post on bioarchive. And so, I think that's, I'm wondering how Mike and Jamie, what do you think? How do you introduce collegiality into a situation where somebody puts something up and people say, you are literally totally wrong? That does happen significantly. And, I don't know how you do collegiality with.
You can say that nicely. Like they may not interpret it as such, but like there's a difference between being uncollegial and being, fawning. I mean, we have a lot of experience now with writing. I think we've shown reviews to people in our in the world where we were still making accept reject decisions that were rejections, and people can't recognize a paper that led public reviews that lead to a rejection because we try to say our commentary in a constructive and positive manner. I think that paper, it's easy to say, look, you got this wrong. I mean, I think here's why we think this paper is wrong. I think you can write public reviews of things like that. So I think it's more about the tone and style of the interaction. And, but people are going to disagree with you if they, I don't know. I don't think it has to be uncollegial to be adversarial is the point. I don't think those are synonyms.
So stewardship is important then, is what you're saying.
Or, people being responsible. I mean, I know we can't rely on that as a general rule, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Something that came up, or maybe something that I brought up as an example in our discussion was that somehow you want the vibe of this to be closer to a practice talk for faculty interviews or a grant interview with your colleagues than, some kind of weird nameless fight. So I agree. I think it's possible to raise contradictory points without insulting by exclusion your partner in the debate. So I think that is certainly possible. Orange Catchbox.
Hi, Gabe from Knowledge Creatures. I'll just say my background's more in product and media and so on. The platform and the sort of collective behavior where these conversations happen matters a lot. If we say that collegiality or any of the other 10 C's I've forgotten are the ones that we want to design this ecosystem for, there are ways to design the ecosystem for that. But I think if we can and avoid a lot of these problems, or at least minimize a lot of these problems, and there are people who study this and who are looking back at the last 10 years of social media and the last 10 years of collective behavior online in particular, and starting to study that earnestly. And I think we can learn a lot from those folks and design for the outcomes that we want. And a lot of us here are already doing that. But just to make the point that I don't think we have to be that conservative in our goals or our aims, because I think we can design a lot of the behaviors that we want to see into tools, what we want. Yeah.
And get people, as Mike said, there's a community of people that are ready to jump in. Sounds good. Okay, wait. So just because we have to, this was a big discussion, but because we should talk about reusing. Marcel brought up the good point that reuse does not have to be purely by journals, even though he's here today in his capacity representing a journal. Do people have thoughts about the questions that were raised? Could we go back to that slide that I can see? Sorry. Thank you. So there were some, I guess it came down to discussion about technical challenges and just culture differences between the people that are implementing and promoting preprint review potentially, and journals that might be the primary customer for reuse. And then that's related to interoperability and other technical challenges, of which I personally, at least for example, have little understanding, but I'm sure they exist. So do people, so we have, a little over 15 minutes to talk about this. Do people want to jumpstart that online or? Okay, Marcel already has the mic, so.
Yeah, I mean, just one that I'll highlight that we talked about a bit in our group is this idea, and I'm curious, like Thomas or sort of others, like I'm not sure if the PCI folks are still with us, but the question of kind of a mismatch of scope between preprint review services and the journals that might be users of those services. And I guess I'm thinking of that particularly when the preprint review services are a sort of community effort, right? Where they sort of come together out of a group of folks that that have an interest in advancing conversation in that way. And it seems to me like, the boundaries of that conversation may or may not track the kind of official scope and mission of the various journals that might be, that those reviews might be served up to. And so, that's not a problem in and of itself. It could just be that, 30% of a journal's submissions could have preprint reviews that speak to them, and then the other 70% don't, or find those from some other place. But I'm just curious if anyone has thoughts about that, about the way that how communities are sort of delineated for preprint review services and journals might be different.
Do people have thoughts? Mike, you have your hand raised? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make it.
We can go back to the full-size mic and
Uh-oh.
Prachi and
I realized someone just sent me a picture of my head was floating in the green screen.
It did. I did not want to point it out, but it caused some titters in the audience. Yeah.
It's been my ambition to be a floating head. I kind of want to make a slightly orthogonal point, which is that I think it's a mistake for us to think about the purpose of preprint review to be guiding journal decisions either locally or remotely. I mean, I think we're not doing preprint review to help journals make decisions about whether or not a paper belongs in their pages. They may or may not find them useful. I think that it's fine. That's for other people to decide on what they do with the public reviews. I certainly wouldn't want to gratuitously make it more difficult for them to do that. But I think it would be a mistake for us to think that we should structure the way that we scope reviews, or the way that we write reviews, or the way that we decide, how and why we decide to share the reviews around the idea that they're going to be used for decision-making in journals. It's an anachronism that it shouldn't be part of our long-term thinking about how this system functions. And I do think it's been very instructive for us to recognize that although that is a potential use case, we're trying to write reviews and assessment that stand on their own as assessments of the work, not independent of having any kind of decision attached to them. And so I just want to lay down a card that I don't think we should be spending so much time worrying about how reviews are going to be reused. We should be thinking about how reviews are just going to be used in the first place, and try to design them to be as broadly useful as possible.
Thanks, Mike. Thoughts? Thomas, quiet. Sarah, quiet. Review comments, nothing from review comments.
well, we can just say almost the opposite.
Sorry, Naomi, one second.
No, yeah. So just to respond to the claim, this is not what we should do. Well, we could just say the opposite. That's what we do. And let me try to reformulate that. I don't see a need to polarize too much. I think we can do really excellent, top-level, super useful, in-depth peer review of preprints that advance science, and it's a real advance in scientific communication. And at the same time, I have these reviews being compatible with journal publishing, and I don't think there is obligatorily a need to contrast these two worlds, or to say that peer review needs to be, by definition, really different from journals. I think we should keep what is good in peer review and make it even better. And the journals are going to be the first to be happy about that. I rather see the journal agnostic preprint review as a driver of change at the journal level. Now we can think there is no hope for journals, but there is no consensus on that, I think.
No, can I just quickly reply to that? That I agree that I love Review Commons reviews. I think they do an outstanding job of producing reviews that stand on their own as valuable contributions. In some ways, I always feel a little bit squirrely about trying to make a decision based on these reviews, because I think the reviews themselves are the real contribution. And I didn't mean to imply that we shouldn't, let this happen, let journals use reviews. I don't think we should, stifle that use case. I just think some of the things that came up in discussion were very much about, scoping the reviews in such a way that they're useful for journals, that they were things that seemed to be interfering with the goal of making useful public reviews. So I think we probably see this in a rather similar way, that I think the Review Commons has done an outstanding job in making a very useful standalone product, irrespective of whether anybody ever uses them to make reviews, and it's still useful for people to have them use reviews. So I wasn't meaning to say we should thwart that effort, just that I just want to be careful about over-engineering the review system, the public review system, around the idea that the reviews are going to be used for journals, which I think has at least come up in some circumstances.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And maybe to echo something that Jamie said in an earlier session, I mean, it's unlikely that we come away from these 2 days with some catch-all solution that's going to solve all of the discussion points we raised here. It seems an example of a case where you really want people pushing multiple products and approaches and strategies. And on one aspect, I agree with Thomas that I think Review Commons and similar are a gateway to bring people over to a new format of reviewing. And at the same time, it should not be the case that all preprint review is supposed to be targeted at a journal. So that seems to make sense, I think, consistent with what most people are thinking here, if I may presume to make that conclusion. Naomi.
Hi, Naomi Penfold.
Clarissa, we'll come to you right after. Sorry.
Cool. Invest in open infrastructure. I wanted to build on what Mike said and throw a user into the room that we've not talked about, which is myself. I'm scientifically curious. I'm a generalist. I'm no longer a practicing scientist. I'm not reviewing. I'm not posting papers. And reading papers is really hard because of the way they're written. And I need access to understand what does this mean. But I want to read preprints, and actually I want to read reviews. And that's what I do, is I tend to read reviews. There's not that many of them out there, but it's where the story is, because I'm a human, and I think it's inherently interesting to watch the conversation happen. And so I'd like to encourage people to think about how we can help that conversation become something meaningful to wider society, because we're talking about advancing science. And what's the point if society can't access the science? That's the whole point of open access. That's the whole point of trying to reach the media, policymakers, patient communities. And that conversation, I just want to tell you how valuable that is to me, to read that conversation. So how can we have that conversation? How can I watch it? How can I see, people in the room are talking live now? It's inherently human and interesting. And so how can we do that more and make that written content really start to shine upwards and, just make it more useful to broader people like me as well?
Thanks, Naomi. That was also beautifully spoken, and maybe on the more prosaic side relates to this idea that there may be formats and technical solutions that enable people to feel that this conversation is well suited to the space. It's like hanging out in a nice wood paneled bar or something. It changes the vibe. Clarice, sorry.
No worries. Hi, so I'm Clarice, postdoctoral fellow at King's College London, working with Professor Fiona Watt. And I just wanted to relate on what Mike just said on the fact that this system, I think because of all the words we're using, and that's something that we did discuss during our breakout session as well, are confused with the old-fashioned, if I can say, classical journal review. And we were discussing that maybe we should use other words to describe it rather than say maybe review. We could talk about, so I think someone said assessment or evaluation or discussion in our breakout session. And yeah, I think we have lots of confusion. I'm still new in the field, but I think there is lots of confusion because of the word that has been using, and people are kind of thinking that they should address review the same way that is addressing now in any of the journal submission we're doing. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, words are important. It's true. I don't know if you were present for the poll earlier, but there was a kind of 60-40 split on whether to call it preprint review or preprint peer review. And at one level, it doesn't matter because we're all on the same page in this room and virtual room, but at another level, it might matter a lot. At the mic.
Hi, Sam Hindle at Pre-Review. I was just thinking something that came up in our discussion group was something that would address the discoverability aspect, but also help to increase engagement. And that is that there's a lot of really good content in comments and on Twitter that come up, but it can kind of get lost. And so one training exercise for early career researchers, for example, could be to pull all of that really interesting content and kind of summarize it and present that as their own kind of review in a sense, but making it clear that they're pulling from other people's comments. And that could then help to increase engagement because what we found at Pre-Review is that as soon as early career researchers get involved in doing the process, they realize that they do have the expertise to peer review other people's work. So this could be a really good starting point for them to get into the process and then get more involved in reviewing preprints.
Yeah, thanks. That's super cool. I mean, for sure, at Prelights, it's, or at least when I was a little more active, it was relatively common practice that we would make sure to try to incorporate any public discussion, usually on Twitter, into the highlights. It has this slight danger, I think, of biasing both choice of paper to highlight and the nature of the highlight towards those people and ensuing discussions that are more Twitter friendly. And so there's some question there of representation, but I think it's a super good point. We have just under 10 minutes before we break for dinner. Sophia.
Yeah, just Sophia and Kamoun Science Lab. Just want to add and second really the last comments from Sam, Clarice, and everyone else that we need new vocabulary because going back to what we discussed this morning, it's really about cultural change. I think what we're trying to do here is change the culture, and I think now when I tell my colleague it's peer review, they immediately think of the more adversarial type of peer review. So we need new vocabulary. There's no question about that. Maybe even talking more about discussion about the paper rather than even assessment or any type of evaluation related vocabulary. So maybe more having a discussion, and that's where also going back to Twitter and all the other discussions that are taking place around the paper. So I totally second that we need new vocabulary because currently there's a lot of baggage coming with the concept of peer review.
Thanks.
Yeah, Dario from Chan Zuckerberg Initiative again. I also want to go back to a few comments were saying we should just embrace this and do it and see what happens. I want to share like a funder perspective here. So full disclosure, we're supporting preprints and a bunch of experiments, like more or less mature, very different in nature in this space. And there are many more that are out there that we're not funding, that others are funding or supporting. And as a funder, the best possible thing for us, and I think it's going to be something also useful for this community, is to have data. You know, it feels like here we're trying to, for very good reasons, over-design, over-engineer around fear and opportunity. And there might be things that work, there might be things that don't work. The reality is that when you design the system and it scales, you have no clue about what's going to happen in the wild. And things may turn absolutely successful or fail dramatically. So the best thing I think we can do as a community is to try a bunch of like bold experiments with different design assumptions, hopefully manage to find some support institutionally or from the funder community, and just to throw data at the problem and then see what works. And in 5 years from now, this conversation is going to be very different.
Okay, there's a good thought that motivated another thought.
Yeah, I guess it's like agreeing with what you're saying. So, I mean, sorry, Elliot, Pieroff, I believe in like having lots of initiatives, trying lots of things, and just see what, you know, the people want to do, right? And then we'll find something that works. That'll give you more data. And I don't think at this point that a funder can come and say, okay, we'll give you, 5 million to build this thing with this over design, because it won't work probably. But we do need funders to enable people to do these things, right? So if we're talking about preprint review, we've got to like enable people to ask for preprint review, because they're not going to do it if they think that their funder doesn't care about it. So all we need is like not to mandate it, but to say you can do it, and we'll like appreciate it. And probably on the review side as well, we would appreciate it. Again, not mandating it, but just enabling it to happen. And maybe also I'll start, I'll talk about tomorrow, but like offering to pay small amounts of these services to make sure that they can continue to exist, right? Because you can't get that data unless they're going to be there for at least 6 months. So
Thanks. I think the incentive conversation, as you point out, will continue throughout and beyond this meeting. On the right side.
I don't know if I want to partially disagree with what Mike said earlier about the importance of thinking about what the journals want. I would like to have much more information about what the journals would like, so that we can decide about whether to structure our reviews and choose our peer reviewers and other things to be compatible with what they want. And I think that's relates to what we discussed this morning about trying to improve the efficiency of the entire process and reduce redundant repetitive peer reviews. But it's a little bit heretical, I think, in this temple of basic science here, that one of the things that we struggle with is who are the other audiences for our peer reviews? And ironically, the people who are exactly in that person's discipline are probably the least important audience, because they don't need a peer review to know whether something's useful or not. Instead, I think about people who are adjacent scientifically, who are interested in the result where it might have applicability in their science, but they don't know if it's good or not. And so they need a review to know that. And because we're also in the implementation adjacent world, like clinical science and public health related science, should policymakers or clinicians or other people act on the basis of the report? Or can they believe the results? Should they change their clinical practice? Should they change their public policy? So I think that one of the difficulties here is figuring out how to have reviews that serve multiple audiences and how to prioritize them. And, we were in COVID space, so that was different than obviously if you're just in structural biology space. But I think it's something that we need to wrestle with, beyond some of the discussions we've had here, is the other audiences for peer review and how do we address their needs.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. And there's already, I think, serious issues with the broader public's understanding of exactly what peer review does. We obviously can't even agree on it amongst a group of career scientists and associated. So, I mean, hopeless, right? But I think it's a super important point, and I suppose has to run parallel to all threads at such discussions. Thank you. We are nearing dinner time for those people on the East Coast of the U.S. Are there any last, amazingly salient points to be made? Mike's head has disappeared. It's back. It's back. Okay. You get the last comment/question of the evening.
I just wanted to really quickly highlight that this came up both in the earlier discussion after the breakout session and now here. I think that this idea of rebranding these terms, I think that preprint is an outdated term if the preprint is the primary product. I think that review is an overloaded term if we're going to be using reviews to do all sorts of things like communicating discussion, communicating comments, communicating feedback on rigor and all of that. So I think that we should be very thoughtful about what we call these things because it does matter.
Thank you. Okay, Go for it. Okay. It has to be weighty.
Well, it's like it's a small point, but I mean, we could do that, right? And we could do that tomorrow, right? Because I think everyone who is responsible for these services is like in this room. So if we want to call it a different word, we could just agree on a word tomorrow and then go and change our websites over the next month.
There is no chance we would agree on the word.
Well, of course not, but
Yeah, that is a good point, and we should see if we can pull it off. I am also skeptical, but I just wanted to say, since the discussion shifted towards the break things and figure out how to fix them later. I mean, just as a member of a very large institution of which the bulk are kind of broadly philosophically aligned with the things we're talking about here, but reluctant for change, which came up earlier. People are not. It's difficult to. We also have to take everybody else along with us, and so the more words we change, the more people you lose for really stupid reasons, right? So I would personally advocate for a slower transition, even if it's frustrating for everyone in this room and the virtual room. Okay, so with that, we are going to adjourn for the evening. I'm sorry, I'm extremely jet lagged, so apologies for any incoherence, and thank you very much for all the contributors to the session, and we will see you all tomorrow.